Greetings, I'm Jafok from Jafok Spaghettorium. In this video, I will explain how our inventory code template works. You can buy it from the Construct 3 store, itch.io, or get it through our Patreon. This is the inventory system. It has chests, it has the inventory, which you can open and close. It has a save and a load button, the message log, which shows certain errors, such as you don't have enough space in the inventory anymore. You also have the option to create items by ID. This will create the item on the floor of the game. Let's create a random item. So this is a water flask. You click it, it goes into the inventory. You see this is an icon, while this is the item itself. As you acquire more of the same item, the stacks get filled up. This item has a maximum stack size of 30. So once it reaches 30, you'll create a new stack if it has enough space. You can loot from chests. You can close it and loot some more. Once you looted everything, the chest disappears and appears again up to a maximum of 2. You might notice that the chests move if they overlap. That is to avoid the overlapping. If they move, also the frame will move with them, so it might jerk a bit. You also have the option to split the items into multiple stacks. You can pick here 1, half, and adjust like so, or you can just type here. You cannot put 0, it says to 1. You cannot put more than the maximum stack size, so you cannot put 31. So we want to split to half, and it creates a new item. You can also split by dragging and dropping, holding the shift button. It tries to split by half. Here, more splitting will not work. You can also drop the item using the context menu, or dragging and dropping outside. You can save the system, can rearrange them, and you can load it. This system relies on arrays. The database of the items is actually an array. This array is the items array. This gets populated when the game starts based on the items JSON file, which is this. We are using this file because it's much easier to add new items. Simply increase the height, and I just decreased it. Increase the height, and here you can write the information of the item. I'll get into more details here a bit later. We have the following layouts. We have the game layout, which holds the game logic. We have the global layers layout, which holds 2 global layers, the tooltip and the inventory. The tooltip layer holds this frame, which using the hierarchy is a parent of these text objects. Also, the tooltip frame gets dynamically resized based on the amount of text the tooltip has. The inventory layer has the inventory, which has the inventory frame and the slots, and also the inventory drop frame, which is this. The frame is again, using the hierarchy, a parent of all these objects. The object bank layout. This holds the remaining important objects in our template. It holds the item, which appears on the floor. As you notice, using the hierarchy, it's a parent of this text object. This is the stack size. The item icon, which consists of 3 elements. First one is the item icon frame, which appears when you drag and drop the item icon. Then it's the stack size, and then the icon itself. We have the chest, You have the context menu with the context menu text. You have the split item frame, and this is the loot frame that appears when the user opens the chest. I will quickly go through the object types and try to explain a little bit about them. In the arrays folder, you can find the items array, which gets populated at the beginning of the game based on the items.json file using the Ajax object. You can see the elements are 0 because it just gets overwritten anyway. The player items array is the array of items that the player currently has. Under the containers folder, we have the chest. The chest has 3 instance variables. Opening status, which holds information whether the chest is currently opened or not, so that you don't open and get more loot if the chest is already opened. The loot array, which is an array written as a string. This is because you cannot attach arrays to construct 3 objects unless you do some JavaScript complex coding. This loot array will do for now because it's usually it would be a bit heavy, but since they're not gonna be thousands of chests on the floor spawning. Here you also have the UID frame 1, which basically holds the UID of the frame attached to the chest. When you open the chest, it creates a frame with slots. On top of those slots are the icons. The chest needs to know which frame it just created so that it can open and close it. In the global folder, there's the Ajax object, which is used to populate the items array based on the items.json. We have the browser object, which is used to throw some errors in the console in case you do some modifications and you figure out something is not working. These errors might help you. For production, they should probably be removed. We have the keyboard object, we have the local storage object, which is used for the save and the load system, and we have the mouse. Inside the items folder, we have the item, which is the item that is created on the floor, the item icon, and the item icon frame, which are the items that appear on top of a slot in the inventory or in the loot frame, and the item stack size. The item stack size shows the amount of items in one stack, for example 3 apples or something. The item inherits its instance variables from lootable F family. The lootable F family has lootable sprites in it, the item and the item icon. And the instance variables are as follows: the item ID, which is from here, the slot ID, which is the slot either in the inventory or in the loot frame where the item is on. This slot ID is useful only for the item icon. The item itself, once looted, becomes an item icon. The stack size, which is self-explanatory, and the item type, because based on this item type, if the item type is of type item, in certain functions it knows to pick item. If it's item icon, it picks the item icon. This is because construct does not allow us to see the name of the object. So we need to do this trick in which we save the name of the object inside the instance variable. And the scope, you will find that I use, this is actually not p underline, it's just scope. P underline, I use it for parameters in functions. You will find that I use scope in variables quite a lot. It basically means what's it for. So if it's inventory, then if the scope is inventory, then I know it's associated to the player's Inventory, if it's loot, is from a chest loot. So that's the item. The item has 8 direction and solid behaviors added. The 8 direction default controls are off. This is to push the item outside of other items when they're created, or outside of chests from the floor. The item icon inherits from lootable if, has drag drop because you want to be able to drag it around, and tween. The tween is used for tweening to a position. This drag drop behavior is enabled and disabled as needed. For example, when you drop an item, it disables all the drag drop behaviors because this is like the most important frame the player needs to pay attention to. You could emphasize this by adding semi-transparent black tiled background behind this, so it would really show that this is the only thing they can access. The item icon frame is this frame that appears when you drag drop an item. The item stack size has initial font size instance variable, which is used with the tween behavior, because when it tweens a value, and this creates the bounce effect. So the value that it tweens, when I split it, is actually the font size. So as long as the bounce size is playing, we set the font size to its initial font size multiplied by the tween value. The initial font size gets initialized when the object is created. In UI, we have the context menu with the instance variable UID attached to know what item it's attached to know what item it needs to perform the actions upon, and the object type, which is actually not used. It would be used if you could create the context menu from items as well as item icons, but I did not include it in this template, so I will just simply delete it from here. The context menu text button, they're just the two buttons that appear on the context menu, the split and the drop. The scope instance variable is pretty basic. It just holds these two split and drop things. Oh, wow. Go away. The tooltip. This is the tooltip frame. Again, it has the UID attached to. The tooltip text, which the scope is title, type, and description. Could add it right here. The buttons have scope as instance variable. Once a button is set, I just put the scope. For this, I want the scope to be create item. For this, it's drop item. Yes, not yeah. This is drop item no. So once the player clicks on a button, it goes it goes through all the scopes that are added in the game, and it checks, is the scope create item? No. Okay. Is the scope save inventory? Yes. And then it does the logic associated. The brightness is used With frame 2, it shows another way of showing that the button is disabled. So right now when you click it for 0.3 seconds, it changes to frame 2, and it also activates the brightness. It activates the brightness because the brightness has 50% brightness basically. So if I activate it here, it's darker, instead of having the button darker by default and increasing the brightness with the effect. Like this, we just enable one effect when we need it. The drop slot, which is this sprite, I could have used the inventory slot for drop slot and for loot slot, but it was creating such complex object picking that I figured that it might be too confusing. This is the frame 1 that appears in multiple places. This is frame 1, this is frame 1, this is frame 1. Using the scope, I can, well, the scope basically tells what's it used for: inventory, drop item, etc. The inventory slot. The inventory slots appear here with slot ID, which must be in order: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you want to add more slots, you can just drag drop, and this is 12, so this one is 13. Okay, now to the code. Thank you. The terms of use, basically don't share it with others. Some resources in case you want a shortcut to the Construct 3 manual are links where you can ask for support, and you can tell us about bugs. And this is quite important, at least in my opinion. I tried to organize this inventory system as well as I could, which is the inventory system is organized by first collapsing everything, because it's easy to get overwhelmed. So you just right click, go to event sheet, collapse all, and then you open them up one by one and try to understand what's happening. I think this is a pretty okay approach. Here it explains about the legend, what things mean. Here it explains about the items JSON and all the components: the items array, the player items array, the item icon, the inventory slot, and the additional systems. So the chest loot, the context menu, item splitting, drop, tooltip system, the mouse cursor system, and the save and load. Some frequently asked questions, the naming conventions, and a short explanation of the layouts and the layers. We use this variable to keep track of what item icon is being dragged, the UID of it in particular. We use this to keep track of what item icon is being split. So, functions. Some are grouped, some are not. You have the logging function, which just adds a message to the message log. You will notice that a lot of the code blocks, especially if they're functions, they're completely empty here and you have to open them. It makes it much easier to scroll down and find the function that you need, with some minor exceptions. For example, this is a big function in which if I had another this one, if I had another event on the top, it gets to be pretty big. The indentations are a bit crazy. Right. The getters. So these functions just return a number. Get player inventory has free slots. If the player has more free slots, it will return 1. If the player doesn't have free slots, it will return 0. It's the stop. You will notice that I try to put the stop loop on the top. From a programmer's perspective, this is wrong, but this is how construct works. The stop loop triggers and then continues with the rest of the actions. And when it tries to redo it, it's like, wait, it was stopped. Okay, so it just skips it. If the stop loop is on the top all the time, you don't miss it. So when you code a loop and you put a stop loop on the top, if it's needed, of course, you're not gonna miss it. But if you code the loop and you start coding at it, and at the end you need to put a stop loop, more often than not, the stop loop is completely forgotten. So this is just an easy way for me to not forget to put it. If I know it needs it, I'll put it on the top. Get item max stack. This returns the maximum stack for an item. So if it's fish, it's gonna be 30. If it's leaf taco, it's gonna be 5. Get item current stack size. This is the stack size that the player currently has. So it checks the player items array and it returns what he has. Get inventory first free slot ID. Returns the first free slot if it has any. This is useful for when looting. Get item icon UID from slot ID. Returns the item icon's UID once you insert the number of a slot ID in it. Yeah, this is useful for when you drop, to swap them. For save and load, it's kind of basic. The save inventory function closes frames and drops the item. So if you have a drop frame open or a split frame open, it's gonna close it. And then it sets the item inventory to what the player has as JSON. And when it loads, it checks if the inventory first exists. If it exists, it closes the frames and destroys whatever item icons are available. So it erases the inventory. And then it loads what it found in the inventory key. It loads it in the player's array and then loops through the player items array and creates the item icon. If this save does not exist, so this action triggers either this or this, then just tell the user that there is no save to load. Show drop frame. This shows drop frame. This shows the drop frame. That's it. It picks what item is being dropped and it positions it to the drop slot, which is this. And it also drops the item icon. No, it disables the drag drop. Sorry. It also positions the frame in the somewhat middle of the screen. And it sets the visibility to visible. This hides. It puts it very far, sets it invisible. And here it activates the drag drop for every item icon in the inventory. Because if you drop something from the inventory, it gets moved there and the drag drop gets disabled. Once you close the frame, say you press on cancel because you do not want to drop this icon, it moves back to the inventory and the drag drop gets enabled. The UID item icon drag is set to 0 because there is none anymore. Create world object. This creates an object on the floor. The item type is set to item because there can be multiple. Right. Can be item or item icon. And here, so it creates the item with the hierarchy, and then it loops through the items array until it finds that particular item ID that you want to create. It stops the loop, and here it calculates a random stack size. This is the maximum stack size of the item. Here is some explanation of why this formula is being used. Here we normalize the stack size so that it cannot go above the maximum stack size, but it cannot go less than 1. And the stack size is being applied to the item that was just created, and the stack size text is being populated here using this background BB code. You create a dark gray background for the text. The animation is being set based on items array at 4 loop index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it picks from this column. And the item ID is items array at 0 and the loop index. So basically it looks into the items array until it finds the item ID that needs to be created, and based on that information it gets the item icon and the stack size, and that is it. Loot item. This loots an object that is contained into the lootable F family. So an item or an item icon. This is used when you click on an item, so it already has the UID, and here it has the stack size of how much you will loot. It destroys whatever frames are created, because if you loot something you shouldn't have the split frame or the drop frame opened. It drops whatever you're currently holding, just in case you are holding and you're also trying to loot. Here it checks if the item is in the player's inventory, and I could put this on the top, like I said, to be consistent. Here it checks if the item is unique. If the item is unique and the player already has it, you cannot have more than one item, so you just send this message. Else, if the player does not have the item and there are no free slots, you cannot loot it, so just show an error message. If there are free slots, it creates the icon and it lowers the lootable object stacks. And again, I should put this on the top to be consistent. If the player already has the icon, the item, loop through his items and find one which has enough space, and then simply just add more stacks to it until it reaches the maximum stack amount. Again, the maximum stack amount can be found in the items JSON over here. So it will be, if you would loop through it, it will be items array at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, comma, loop index. These are some other cases in which the player has the item, but it's almost full or is full, and in that case it needs to create new stacks. In here it creates new stacks if there are free slots, of course. This function lowers the stack of an object from lootable F family. Create item icon. This creates an item icon in the player's inventory or in the chest loot frame. We check the scope of it, and that tells us if it's if the item should be created in the inventory or in the loot frame. It creates the item, it initializes it, and again it checks for the scope. If it needs to be created in the inventory, the player items array must be modified. If it's created in the loot, it just gets created there without modifying any loot array, because the loot array gets initialized before this function is triggered. After the loot array is initialized, then this function is triggered and it creates the graphical representation of the loot array. Again, the loot array was the string instance variable that holds the items inside the chest. This is pretty simple. It just updates the stack text size. This sets the stack unless it's 0, then it just destroys the item. The bounce size text status is this effect. So if you look at the stack size, it has this effect on it. This just the item icon drop on initial slot just drops the item icon where it used to be. So if you cancel it, it goes back. This drops the item icon. It just affects the drag drop behavior. This clears player items array slot. The player items array, you will notice here that it affects the height of 0 and 2. I will explain soon why this happens. This swaps items from the slots. And this tweens the position so that it doesn't just jump instantly. Like so. You see there's a fast tweened movement here. This closes certain frames when save and load is triggered. So those were some of the functions. We have more functions in the groups if it's strictly related to the group itself. On startup layout, it hides the tooltip, it hides the drop frame, and it resets these variables to 0. So basically here it just deconstructs certain things that you see here. it hides this. It sets it to minus 10,000, 10,000, and sets it invisible. The reason why I didn't do this to begin with is that I'd like to see what's here. So if I set this to minus 10,000, 10,000, I will have no idea that it's even on this layout. So yeah, I wouldn't know it's here. Over here, the AJAX requests the items.json database. After it's done, it triggers the completed and it loads the JSON into the items array. Here it populates the item list based on the items array. Right, so the player's items array. This has three elements basically. The player's item array of loop index and 0 is the item ID. Loop index and 1 is the slot ID. Loop index and 2 is the stack size. And I explained here. Oh, this is so white, good God. Player items array is the array of the items the player has in his inventory. So over here, player items array x1 holds the inventory slot number. This is important and it must be initialized and not changed because this is related to the slots that we have here. So each inventory slot has a slot ID. So the slot ID from here correlates to the player items array from here. This loop goes to the maximum amount of inventory slots that you currently have, and it populates the height of 1 of player items array. It populates it properly. So unless you change the slot ID for whatever reason, this is just gonna work. You can add as many inventory slots as you want. When you want to add an inventory slot, holding the control, or if you're using Mac like me, you can hold the command and you drag, and let's say you want one here. Then you need to increase the slot ID to 13. You want another one, you can do the same. 14. Of course you can also create these dynamically, like code them. That's quite easy, but I didn't feel that it's really needed in this template. Okay, on Ajax items completed, as I said, it just loads the JSON into the items array. The buttons, this is pretty straightforward. I use the brightness effect. So as long as the brightness effect is not enabled, it will do the logic. When you click it for a split second, as you see here, it enables brightness. It waits 0.3 seconds and then it disables it. So if you click 2 times in this wait, it will not trigger. This helps avoid multiple clicking on buttons by accident. This is the highlight effect when the mouse cursor is over the button, because the button has this animation frame too. Has 3 animation frames. Right. So this is when you mouse over it. When you click it, it gets set to this one, and it also lowers the brightness of it. This is just an example on how you can use effects to achieve this button logic. The item icon group includes dragging, right-clicking, which creates the context menu, and the effect. So when an item icon is being dropped, if it's overlapping an inventory frame, we pick the nearest inventory frame is overlapping, because here it's overlapping 2. So if it's closer to this one, it will have the logic on this, so it will just go back. If it's closer to the empty one on the left, it will have the logic of this one, so it will just move. And here, if the shift is down, then attempt to split it. Unless if you have only one stack, then you should just move it instead. When it moves, the player items array must also have the proper information set. So where the previous item was at, the ID is set to 0 and the stack size is set to 0. We do not set to 0 the slot. So if this would be here, it would be bad. The slot ID must remain consistent throughout the whole game. So basically what this does is that when I move it, the player items array from here on loop index 0 this has no item ID and it has no stack ID. Right clicking on an item icon, as long as you're not holding the left mouse button as well, will create the context menu. This is the effect of moving to slot, and this is the effect of the item stack size mouse. The tooltip system has 2 functions: to show the tooltip and to hide the tooltip. We pick the object, and because the tooltip F does not have item ID as an instance variable, which we need, the lootable F has item ID. We try to pick first the item, and if this condition runs, it sets the L item ID to the item's item ID. If the L item ID is 0, it means it didn't find an item here. So it tries to pick the next best thing, the item icon, and then it sets the item ID to it. If you until now didn't find any item ID, there's an error. So if you want to show the tooltip for more objects, you add it to the tooltip F, and then you continue this list. And here the tooltip gets populated from, again, the items array. So 1, 2, 3, 5. 1, 2, 3, and 5. This goes and checks the quality and sets the specified color. And here the tooltip becomes visible. We don't set it visible higher up because you might notice a flicker, especially with the color being changed. So initially it might be its normal color, which looks like so, and then after a split second it would change color based on what quality it is. And here other tooltip elements get initialized. The text, here the heights are being calculated, and as explained in the comments, there's a workaround for a bug that cannot be fixed, in which you just add a bit more to the height of it, since Construct cannot calculate pixel perfect. And here the X of the tooltip gets set so that it doesn't go outside the screen, nor left or right. The Y position gets set here depending on where the item is. By default it tries to go on the bottom, but if the item is lower than half the screen, it will go on the top. The hide tooltip just puts the tooltip very far away, sets it invisible. And here is the logic of figuring out whether the tooltip should show or not. The context menu group has two functions to create the context menu. Initially, it tries to destroy any context menu. If you want the context menu to be created on other objects, you just need to expand this object type and then pick the object. Assigns the texts for split, for drop, sets the width of them. This destroys the context menu. If the mouse is over the context menu, the opacity is set accordingly. Clicking the context menu button for split when the context menu is created. The context menu frame has its instance variable UID attached to the context menu f.uid. When the user clicks the context menu text button, it picks the parent, so the frame of it, so that then we can pick the item icon based on the frame's UID attached to. On any click, if the user doesn't click on the context menu, it gets destroyed. The split item group has the function to split the item, to create the frame, which is this one. It creates the frame using the template split item, also the hierarchy. Here it destroys the frame. As long as there is an item to split, the function split item set max input is being triggered. So this happens every tick. Anything slower will allow the user to see that he can actually go above the maximum, and then after a moment the value will be set lower. The text here is set to either anything between 1 and how much, or what the stack size of the item is. So for example here, if I want to split this, I cannot go lower than 1, and I cannot go above 3. The chest loot. It creates the chest. It creates it very far, and it sets the opacity to 0. It starts the fade in effect, and then it positions it in the game viewport. This is because I want to see the chest here, and if I would have just created it at a random location inside the viewport, the user would see the chest appearing with 100% opacity for a split second, and then the opacity would be set to 0, and then the fade will start. You can avoid all of these by starting with the chest opacity to be 0. But then it's a bit hard to see your items around the object bank. Chest create loot frame. This function creates the loot of a chest when clicked by the user. whatever chest is being clicked is sent here as a parameter, UID underline chest. It creates, so it picks the chest that was clicked, it creates the frame somewhere far away with the template loot, so this one. The reason why it creates it outside the viewport is that first the frame is being created, and then the chest, based on the loot array instance variable, so based on that it will populate the chest's loot in the background, and then based on that the frame will have its slots populated. If the chest has no loot array assigned, then we initialize it. If not, so if the chest does have loot array, then this block is being skipped and the loot is being created. This is important because the chest can be opened and closed at any time. The first time a chest is opened, this will trigger. But then if the player closes it, it will run this function again and it will just create the item icons that the chest has. There is no need to reinitialize the chest's loot table. So here we have water flask and chocolate buns. Here we have raw fish and sandwich. And the loot is being kept because the chest does not regenerate its loot table. Now a new loot table has been created. A chest must have at least one item. In this block, a random item is being created. The random ID and the stack size. And here the chest's instance variable loot array of type string is being created. So the way this works is that the first element until the comma is the item ID. The second element until the comma is the slot ID to be placed on. And the third element is the stack size. This first element, this first object, until the first comma is the item ID. So it's red wine, which means that it's 108. So it's 108, comma. The slot ID is the first slot here. And then the third element is the stack size, 10. There is an example here. And then we separate, since we might have more items, we separate the items with the horizontal line. And now, with a chance of 25%, more items can be created. From 2 to 8, because currently we have only 8 slots in the loot frame. If you want to create a bigger chest with more items and more slots, this value must be changed. After you change the value here, you'll have to pass it as a parameter. Most likely, the chest object can hold the amount of slots in an instance variable. Could be and then you send it as a parameter here and it gets assigned here. Then you would go from 2 to chest dot slot count, and the random ID is being created, the stack size, and the slot, because this is the first slot, this is the second slot, third, fourth. This variable that starts from 1 must be incremented. And now the chest's loot array must be continued. So it's the previous value, which, let's take this example, looks like so, and then it adds an item, a slot, and a stack size. So here it could be something like so. After all of this is done, the last vertical line must be removed with this code. And now this code goes through all the elements in the chest loot array and creates the item icons associated with that item ID, with the item stack size, and places it on the slot. Here we track how many vertical lines there are. If it's less or equal to 1, we set the repeat count to 0. Otherwise, this is the correct repeat count. If you want to debug this, feel free to add browser log to understand better what's happening. Basically, we try to see how many individual items there are. And after that, we go through each individual item, and then we split it into the item ID, the slot ID, and the stack size. This is the LData single. So here in this loop, we loop through all the items. So if we would have here another one, in this example, it will loop 3 times. One for this block, another one for this part, and the last time for this in here. After, and for each part we have to split it. So the data single, let's say in this example, initially would be this. So I wrote here an example. If the chest loot array is this, which is from here without the last line, then for loop index 0, the data single would be this. For loop index 1, it will be the next part, and for loop index 2, it will be the last part. And for each of these, we pick the item ID, we pick the slot ID, and the stack. So in this case, the first item ID will be 101, slot ID 1, stack 7. And we create the item using this information. Then it loops again. It will be loop index 1. The LData single will be 102, 2, 15. So the item ID will be 102. The slot ID will be 2. And the stack will be 15. The chest loot has been assigned, the loot has been created. Now it's time to place the frame into position. The wait here is required in order to wait for the creation of all the item icons, and then the frame is placed at the position of the chest. So this is probably the most complex part of the system, is handling this loot array. This is just a loot frame being closed. We go through every chest and see which one is open. We pick the frame from it. We just destroy the frame. If there is no loot array, it means we looted everything. So we looted everything, it disappears. If the loot array is still present, it means it still has items, so keep the chest. So here the chest has been completely looted. This block handles clicking on the chest, and if the cursor is not over frame 1, so if this is 0, this function, it will close whatever loot frames are available, are opened, and it will create the chest's loot. The reason why this function is here is because some chests can be close to one another. So if I open this one, it creates the chest's loot frame, which is actually frame 1. So now, if I didn't add that function, I could have clicked on the other chest right here, and I would have opened another frame, and maybe I just wanted to loot an item instead. If I don't click on the frame one, I can open the other chest. And clicking on the item icon loots the item icon. The mouse cursor. This is the function cursor is over frame status. So it goes through all the frames, frame 1, and it just returns the value. And here the code checks if the mouse cursor is over interactable objects, or if an item icon is being dragged. And at the end, based on the cursor state instance variable, it says the cursor. When you click an item from the floor, if the cursor is not over frame 1, then loot it. Because you could have, I'm a bit unlucky here, you could have this loot window opened with an item underneath. If you click here, you should not be able to loot the item. And B on the keyboard opens and closes the inventory. And that's about it. Thank you for watching. I hope this was very useful. Don't forget, when you have something that seems quite overwhelming, go to event sheets, collapse all. You can do the same here. Collapse all and just open them up one by one and go through them like that. You can find this inventory system on the Construct Restore, on itch, and on our Patreon. If you find any bugs or have any feedback, you can drop us a message on jfoc.com, or you can find me on Discord at jfoc. See ya!